Hello and welcome to Series 6 of In Suspense, a podcast and vodcast for fans and writers of crime fiction, and the first in our new series of Minisodes with author and editor Phoebe Morgan. Phoebe Morgan is a best-selling author and award-winning editor. She studied English at Leeds University after growing up in the Suffolk countryside. She has previously worked as a journalist and now edits commercial fiction for a publishing house during the day and writes her own books in the evenings. She lives in London and you can follow her on Twitter, Instagram at Phoebe and Morgan, Facebook at Phoebe Morgan Author, or find her blog about publishing and writing, which is really good, by the way, at www.phoebemorganauthor.com. And we'll put all those details on the site for you. We'll list it on the website. Her books have sold over 225,000 copies and been translated into 10 languages, including French, Italian, Norwegian, Polish, and Croatian. Her new thriller, The Wild Girls, will be published by William Morrow in the US. Her books are also on sale in Canada and Australia. Phoebe has also contributed short stories to Afraid of the Light, a 2020 crime writing anthology with proceeds going to the Samaritans, Noir from the Bar, a crime collection with proceeds going to the NHS, and Afraid of the Christmas Lights, with all profits going to domestic abuse charities. Her 4 thrillers can be read in any order, and her next book, The Trip, will publish in February 2023. And you can find links to buy Phoebe's books in the description of the podcast and on our YouTube channel.
Yes, I won't forget to do that. So as before, each episode will be around, each minisode, I should say, will be around 10 minutes long, and we'll focus on different aspects of the editing process. So without further ado, let's crack on with the lovely Phoebe Morgan.
Thank you.
Hello, Phoebe, and welcome to our second minisode. Today we are talking about self-editing, and I'm going to dive in with my first question, which is, what should an author do with regard to editing their manuscript before sending it off to their editor?
Hello. So I think it really depends on what stage you're at in your publishing career. So if it's maybe your debut novel, I think it can be really hard to just take that step and send it out to an agent or to your editor or however you're working. But the main thing I would say is you have got to get to that point where you will let it go. So I think it's really important to make sure you've read through your manuscript multiple times, but it's also important to recognize that it's never going to be perfect, and that's why you have an editor. So as an editor myself, I'm never expecting a novel to be 100% flawless. There's always things that might need looking at again. But, I do expect a kind of certain level of attention to detail. And I really do appreciate it when authors have, taken the time to go through it properly and to make sure there's no glaring plot holes or, no huge errors. And I think it's important, if you can, just to give yourself a bit of time away from it before you actually send it in. So what I tend to do is to finish writing, if I'm writing one of my novels, finish writing the novel, and then I send it to my Kindle, and then I try and put it away just for a week or so, and then I reread it as though I'm sort of trying to come to it fresh. And then I always notice things that I haven't spotted the first time around. So I think it's important to just give yourself that little bit of time before you send it off, because you'll be amazed at how much easier it is to spot anything that you might have missed. I know some people send it to beta readers, so you can always do that. Send it to someone you trust, get them to have a look through. But I know some people find that uncomfortable, so I don't think it's something you necessarily 100% have to do. But slow down, give yourself the time, and just accept that it won't be perfect. But make sure that you sort of give your editor the chance to see it in its best possible version that you can get it to at that stage.
That's a really great answer, thank you.
Do you sometimes, Phoebe, see sections of novels that you're editing while the authors are still in the process of writing them, or do you tend to read them only when the author has finished? And do you have a preference either way, or does it depend on the situation and the author?
Yeah, it slightly depends. My personal preference is to read it once the author has finished, so to read it all in one go. And that's because I'm often looking at the structure of the novel, and so I want to sort of see how it hangs together as a whole, rather than, if I'm reading it in chunks, it's quite hard to think about how it how it all hangs together. But that said, if an author really wants me to look at the opening again, or they've got a particular scene or chapter that feels difficult, then I can always do that if that's what they want.
Yes, I think that's how I've usually worked in the past. I've sort of given my editor chunks, usually like the first half or the first quarter or something. But I know some authors don't like doing that, do they? And they like to write the whole thing. Is that what you do, Lauren?
Yes, I actually write the whole thing, because I find that it's not until I've got to the end that I really realise what my book and my characters are about. And then the first bit's like, I'm like, oh, I wish you hadn't read that, because it's now going to change anyway. So, but it is really interesting to hear how people go about it differently.
I think I'm the same as you, Leslie. I'm the same as you, Lauren, in that I often get to the end and then the beginning has to change. And so I think that's one of the reasons why I like to read as a whole, because stories do change and evolve as you go. But again, I do think it depends. Like if it's an author I've been working with for years and they're on their fourth book or something, then I sort of know their style a little bit more, and so then it's maybe easier to read chunks. And obviously there might be other reasons why they need me to do that, so it's whatever works for them. But I will then always need to read it again from start to finish, because that's just how my brain works, I think.
Yeah, of course.
Yes, I think sometimes if I get to that stage where I feel it's not working, or where I've lost confidence in it, and it's not that I want to keep on sending chunks, but maybe just send one section, and then often the questions that my editor will ask me, or the points that they raise, will just spark me off and think, oh yeah, that's how I can go on. Do you know what I mean? So it kind of motivates
that's interesting.
Yeah, I think that can be useful. Now you mentioned sending the book to the Kindle and giving it a bit more time, which is really great advice. I mean, it can be really hard when you're writing a book to see the wood from the trees, or is it the trees from the wood? The wood from the trees?
Wood first.
Wood for the trees.
Trees to woods doesn't sound right, does it? When you're self-editing, and you might miss phrases like that in it. Have you got any other techniques or advice for self-editing for authors, please?
I think it's important to sort of look at it in look for different things each time you read, essentially. So in one round of your reading, it might be that you're really focusing on the structure and you're thinking, does this beginning really draw the reader in? Does the ending make sense? If it's a crime novel, am I sort of tying up any loose ends properly? So maybe do sort of one read where you're really focused on plot and structure, and then another read where you're focused on characterization, because I think those are the sort of two pins that are so important to any novel. And almost if you separate them out, it might help you if you're feeling a bit overwhelmed by the editing process. So you could do a second round where you're really looking at, even you could just be looking at one character or your main cast of characters, and try and just sense check whether whether they're consistent throughout, whether they are sort of going on the character arc that you're wanting them to go on, whether there's any sort of discrepancies in the way they're behaving. Because one thing I do sometimes find when I'm reading is if a character does something that just really doesn't fit or chime with like the rest of the way they've been portrayed, that can feel quite jarring, and I think readers do notice that sort of thing. And so it's really about getting to know your characters, and then when you're doing the editorial process, you can just check, does this make sense with the type of person I think this character is, and what kind of person am I trying to create on the page, and what kind of impression am I trying to leave my reader with. So I think it's about doing a couple of different rounds of edits. And the other thing I would say is don't worry about doing it in chronological order all the time. I often jump around when I'm editing, and actually I think people can get quite bogged down with the idea of, right, I'm going to start my editorial process at the beginning and I'm going to end at the end, and even if I find bits hard, I'm just going to persist. Whereas actually, if you're struggling with the beginning, it might be a good idea to move to the middle and edit a little bit there and then move back. And I think if you allow yourself that flexibility, it can just release that creativity, and it can take away that feeling of doom and dread as you sort of plough your way through a manuscript that you feel isn't working. So I think it's important to recognise that you can edit in a non-linear way as well.
Oh, that's great advice. Thank you. And we actually have a whole minisode on characterization as well coming up. So tune in for more advice on character too.
Well, sadly, Phoebe, that's all we've got time for today. Thank you for listening to our minisode with author and editor Phoebe Morgan. And thank you, Phoebe, for sharing your expertise with us today.
Thank you.
Yes, and if you've enjoyed this minisode, do remember to check out Phoebe's full episode, which is series 5, episode 7 on location, location, location. But for now, it's time to say goodbye from Phoebe. Goodbye from Leslie, and goodbye from me. Bye.